Hi, I'm Ihsan Plus, the avatar for Ihsan Ihsani, an adjunct assistant professor at Columbia Business School and an investor at Crescendo Partners. In this episode of our series on generative AI and value investing, I'm delighted to share a recent conversation Ihsan did with Ihsan Saracgil, head of Quant Research at OpenBB, an open source and flexible Gen AI platform that has some exciting features. For example, you can use Gen AI in OpenBB in a specific context or do hypothesis testing. The discussion also covered some of the challenges in using Gen AI in investment research, such as privacy and accuracy of outcomes. Before we continue, I'd like to highlight that this conversation was recorded on December 12th, 2024, and since then, the OpenBB's platform has been rebranded as OpenBB Workspace. With this update, and without further ado, let's dive in.
All right. I'm really delighted today to have Ihsan Saracgil here to talk a little bit about the OpenBB platform and how it can aid the fundamental and value investing process. A little bit about Ihsan's background. He's a very seasoned data scientist, currently head of research at OpenBB. Previously, he was a vice president at Visible Alpha. He's a kind of guy who understands both the technology part, which is very important, but also the buy side and sell side processes. So I'm personally looking forward to hearing his insights. So to start, as Ihsan, maybe you tell us a little bit about OpenBB, what this platform is all about, who is it for, what it does, and then maybe we take it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Pleasure talking to you, Ehsan. So I'll give you a very brief summary, and you can look up some of these things also online, our origin story and things of that nature. So OpenBB is a very new firm. It started as an open source project, and it was called something else at the time. So if you remember the Citadel game stock, meme stock saga that we had, around COVID. So that's actually when this project is started as an open source platform for more individual prosumer type of, investors. It wasn't really meant for institutional clients at the day.
Right.
The idea was to essentially come up with a platform in which you can connect different data sources that you use for investing. I would say the focus from the very start was a little bit towards like discretionary value investor type of people. Like if you think about the GameStop saga, the whole point was that, look, this stock is severely undervalued, short interest are, and so on and so on. It was actually a value investing issue, right? So it was essentially designed for like, you have all these interesting data sources, but they all come with different formats, different styles, different authentication. Like I would like to be able to put everything in one place. I want to have a dashboarding tool that will allow me to unify my analysis across all these different data sets. And then when the ChatGPT and LLMs became, a major force, the company essentially took a leap of faith to saying that, look, like we have this infrastructure, you can bring your own data, you can bring your own visualizations, all of these things. Let's also connect the co-pilots, LLMs, to this platform. And they're going to have access to the context of this data sets that I have in my dashboard. And I can use the co-pilot to analyze some data, generate some reports, help me make sense of the numbers, maybe search, do web searches and actually connect that here. Help me, like LLMs are pretty good at writing code. So I want to manipulate data. Maybe I can use Copilot to help me do some of these things. So it became this like three key components of an investor needs: data, some kind of visualization slash dashboarding tool, and now the Copilot, which is this new kid around the block that we think is going to be hugely, hugely impactful about how we do investment research in this century, most likely. So it started from there. It was more like, an open source project for individuals, but over time, I guess like we saw that people are, we have power users who are doing like really sophisticated things. It's not just about individual stocks. Then you can look at crypto, you can look at fixed income, FX, even go outside the world of finance and look at like sports analytics and things. It just became like a tool for data analytics finance is a huge use case for it, but any data analytics can actually fit in this type of area. And we're getting a lot more power usage and professional usage. So we, when there is a seed investment in the firm, so this basically took a little bit of a different direction than on top of the open source community we still maintain today. So we call this now our free tier. Anyone can access OpenBB and use it for free. But we also created a pro tier, which is a more paid product because we're developing our own OpenBB analysts, agents, co-pilots, and so on. So you get essentially some premium access to these LLMs, and it comes with like other features such as, you can sign up with your team and you can collaborate with them. You can share, you can share dashboards with them and things of that nature. So we had this enterprise/professional version meant for more like institutional investors who work in teams. So that's the direction that we're going. Like there's a free community version open for everybody, and there's like more like a paid version for more institutional investors.
Right. No, that makes sense. So earlier you showed me a very exciting use case in the platform. Maybe for the next few minutes, we make this a little bit more tactical. You showcase the platform, walk us through a demo, and show us, what are some of the things that the platform can accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start from the very beginning. So when you land on OpenBB, you're going to basically see, like, we talked about these three important pieces: data, dashboards, and Copilot. So you're kind of seeing all of that. So we're going to ask you, okay, so what are some of the data sets that you would like to connect here? So you can drag and drop files. You can bring your PDFs. You can bring your spreadsheets. You can make API calls. You can connect various hosted applications. You can put in your RSS feeds. You can track websites. You can connect your database. Let's say you have some data sitting on a Snowflake, or you have SQL, so all sorts of structured, unstructured data, you can connect it to here. We also, in the pro version, make it, we have some data licensed to certain providers. So we make some data available out of the box also that's included in your license. So let's take a look at some templates. Like this is, for instance, an analyst template. So this is the dashboard, the second piece that I talked about. So you don't have to use these templates. Like we just basically give you these as like some ideas around what kind of tools are available, and you can essentially you go reconfigure and create your own workflow, and you design your own dashboard. But this is just meant to be as like, here's some kind of things that you can do. Like, for instance, I have some market screener at the top. So I can drag and drop, do whatever I want with these things. I can customize where this is coming from. So then I have a news widget. Again, like I can change all of these things, move them around. I can group them. So here, for instance, I have a watch list of stocks that I care about. I group them to the company news. So if I add something to my here, let's say I want to track this, so it's going to be added to this menu as well, and so on and so forth. So I can take a look at price targets if you have analyst data. So it kind of gives you an idea that I can build all sorts of visualizations, tables, and different types of utils, and I can customize all of these things for myself. And then the final thing is this menu on the right. So this is essentially your Copilot. So your Copilot is, by default, we give you this OpenBB Copilot / we're going to call this analyst soon. So this is using public foundational models like OpenAI, Claude, and whatnot. So it's an agentic design that we develop. So if you use our free version, you're going to get limited access to this. In the pro version, you get a very generous access to this. And everything that you have on your dashboard, Copilot can access it. Imagine that this is the earnings season, and I'm interested in some stock like Nvidia. They just announced their earnings. The earnings transcript just came out, and I want to understand what kind of guidance that they provided. What did they provide guidance about? What did they say? And I want to relate those things to the stock market, the prices, and what kind of stories are being talked about, and so on and so forth. It's a very typical analysis that a fundamental investor would do around earnings. And if anything, like if you speak to anyone in the industry, it's a very overwhelming time for analysts, because you have a lot of stocks in your portfolio. You need to do this analysis repeatedly for like 50 stocks, and you're hit by news and new stuff that's coming out left and right. So OpenBB and the copilots could be really helpful in this sort of context. So this was a pre-made demo, so I'll just go over it for like interest of time. So in this case, I had an earnings transcript widget. I wanted to look at what did NVIDIA management said in their previous quarter transcript. So this came out in May, right? Like, what did they say in this quarter? What was the outlook? So I basically asked the Copilot something like, let's extract the key management guidance. I want to specifically focus on the next quarter. Let's actually just copy paste this prompt and see what we can do here. So I'm going to add this transcript to my context, and let's ask the question. But this is where things get a little bit interesting. So you see here that the LLMs, they do a very good job working with the textual data, but you're an investor. We live in the world of spreadsheets and numeric numbers and things of that nature. So it's very important that OpenBB or whatever LLM tool that you're using actually outputs you the data in a way that is really investor friendly. And that's one of the things that we built at OpenBB. So I asked a question, and I basically said that, look, I want a table. I want to see something like, tell me what the metric is so that I can search for these things in the filings later. And I want to know what is the number that they said, and if it's a range, make sure that it's captured that range, right? So they said 28 billion plus or minus 2%. So let's do a little bit of math based on this data. So I can export this table into a widget and just add it to my dashboard. This is another like novel feature that we have on OpenBB. So you're not limited to the output that the LLM just gives you, and you don't have to see it in your chat screen. So now that data, I just made it part of my dashboard. So now I can just basically iterate on this and forget about the original source. Like, I no longer need to deal with the text. I already have some numeric-ish data in my dashboard. So let's just basically iterate on that. So I already had this in my dashboard, so I'm not going to add it again. So let's say I add this to my context, and I want Copilot to do a little bit of math, right? Like, 28 billion plus or minus 2%. Well, that's still text. Let's basically ask it to do a little bit of math for us. And let's say, convert the value by doing the math in the value. Give me low, mid, high end of the guidance as separate columns. So I'm going to basically give them some instructions what I want. If there is no range in the original guidance, set low equals mid equals high. Output a table. I want it to be metric. Let's keep the period low, mid, high. All right, let's see what it does. So it's going to be creating something like this. I don't know what it's going to do, but the point is just to give you guys some of these things, show you how this works live. So there you go. So now I actually have a very investor-friendly data available to me, right? So I can just basically, with one click, I can add this to my dashboard. So I actually had this here, but this looks actually much nicer. So let's just basically use this. Sorry, I just noticed that this actually, this is the better version. So I've noticed that I actually exported the version that has a text in it. So if we give you all of these choices, if you want a report, you can include the text. If you want just the numeric data because you live in the world of spreadsheets, we give you that option too. So now this is great. Look, this is pure numerical that I can work with this, right? So the original textual data is no longer relevant for me. So now I can work with this. So just for interest of time, I'll just show you some of the steps that people tend to do on the buy side or on the sell side. So now I know what guidance you provided. Let's say I want to check what is it that you actually reported in your 10Q. And I want to know if the reported number actually beat the guidance that you provide for that quarter, or you missed it by how much. And later, I want to relate these beats and misses into the market reaction. So I can, as a fundamental / value investor, I would like to know that, you beat or miss on 50 different KPIs, but there's only one market reaction. So what are some of the most important things that might be driving the market response, right? It's a fundamental problem that the investors face that the Copilots could be really, really helpful for. So for interest of time, like, I'm not going to run the whole demo, so you guys got to get the idea, but let's just talk through it. I dragged and dropped a 10Q, which is in a public domain. I get it from the website. You can actually track the investor relations website directly here and just download it from there if you want. But I just put the PDF. But look, it's a 57-page PDF, right? If I wanted to look for everything that they provide guidance on, it's a big job. But I no longer need to do that with the help of the Copilot. So I can just basically ask the Copilot that, look, let's add this data into my context. So I want you to I want to remove these things from my context. These are no longer relevant. So what I want you to do is specifically focus on the data that's presented in this table. And I want you to focus on this filing. So now I'm going to tell you that based on these two things, go through the financial report, look for the items that the management provided guidance back in Q1, which is contained in the other table. Tell me what is the actual result that is in this PDF, and tell me how much it differs from the midpoint of the guidance, right? So if I do this analysis, I'm going to get a new table like this, right? So the first part was the original table, like this is the guidance that we already did from the transcript. So now the Copilot went through the PDF and said that, look, the reported number was 30 billion, the reported number was this, and so on and so forth. And it also tells me what is the surprise, right? So on the tax rates, they actually were below the guidance. So the tax rates came out lower. The margins came out a little lower than what they provide guidance on. So this company, NVIDIA, is less profitable than what they thought they would be, right? Even though they actually turned out to be more, they generated more revenue, okay? So, but lots of things to chew on here, right? So now let's look at the next step. What did actually happen, right? So we can pull up a price chart. We have the price data coming from various different sources. This chart is TradeView, where people are familiar with it. It's an excellent trading charting facility that we integrated to OpenBB. We filled it with some data coming from some vendor. We actually give you options that you don't, if you subscribe to a crypto data set from X, Y, and Z, you can use our charting facility to fill the data with, fill the chart with that data. So, you're not limited to one asset class. You're not limited to one vendor. You can basically design things, whatever your investor philosophy is, or whatever asset class that you care about. In this case, it's the stock price, obviously. But so I have the price chart. Again, so I'm just going to fast forward a little bit, but I'm interested in, I can add this to context and ask a question like, what was the returns around this time, right? So I actually computed something like, around the earnings announcement, how did the NVIDIA stock price return turn out to be? So what are the days that they gained? What are the days that lost? In particular, we had to find out that, after you announced, the stock actually declined, right? But it's a little bit confusing because it looked like they actually had a good quarter, right? Like they beat their guidance on revenue. So it sounds a little bit strange or controversial that if your sales grew faster than you communicated, how is it the case that the stock actually declined on that day, right? But let's get some help from Copilot how to make sense of these numbers. So I'm going to ask something like, despite having so the stock market, the stock price declined after these numbers are reported. So look at the last column of this table. So I have a little too many things in my context, so I'm going to get rid of some of these things. I think all I need is this table in the context. This is very important, right? Most of the tools don't allow you to control your context. And we found that this makes a huge difference when you're an investor, to very tightly control where do you want Copilot to pay attention to. Look at the last column of this table, and sorry, let me just edit this. And come up with 3 hypotheses that might explain why stock price declined after the earnings announcement. Okay, so I mean, obviously, with in this short demo, you're looking at 5, 6 numbers, but when you are actual buy-side investor, you are potentially looking at 50, 100 of these metrics, right? So there could be a lot of different things that are going on. So it's real difficult to look at a huge spreadsheet of numbers and then come up with a couple of hypotheses that I can pursue, right? Be very careful here. I'm not asking Copilot to come up with a trade idea here. I'm just asking that help me make sense of the numbers so I have some hypothesis that I can do a follow-up research. So what could have happened, right? Look at these numbers. Maybe you beat the revenue, but it might be the case that your revenue growth actually slowed down. That's a further research question, right? It doesn't come out from this table. So it's something, it's giving me an idea to explore. It might be the case that, look, the fact that you missed your margin expectations and you're not profitable as you thought you would be might be the reason why this is going on. Another great hypothesis. I don't know if this is true or not. I'm just trying to come up with ideas to pursue. So let's take some of these things, right? Let's go to a news widget and or maybe we do a web search. I'm going to ask the web. I had the prompt here. So let's see what people have actually been talking about. So NVIDIA had I'm not going to say recently because this is a little bit outdated, had a positive earnings report on Q1 2024. Why did the stock market decline? What did people talk about as causes? So let's do a web search, right? One way to back up some of these hypotheses if there's any meat to it. So I did this before. So while this is actually happening at the background, you see kind of so I run it at different times. So I think it's probably going to give different kind of answers. So right now there's an issue with there's very high expectations of this company. And if you if you miss anything, there's a bit of an overreaction to it. There's a concern about margins. But there you go. These things that we saw from our analysis of the transcript and the report, and then I asked the Copilot to come up with some hypotheses. I do a web search, and yeah, people are talking about these things, right? But the revenue growth expectations, that actually doesn't seem to be too much of an issue. So that hypothesis maybe wasn't really on point. But look, I actually backed up some of the hypotheses that the Copilot come up with here. So now I can dig a little bit deeper on some of these things. So it seems like the declining margin is potentially an important thing, right? So, and if you're a fundamental investor, that opens up a lot of new thoughts to follow through. Why the margin is falling? What is driving this? Is it production delays? Is it this? Is it that? Can I not control my headcount? Is it the operating expenses? Maybe trade war concerns, right? So now I have a lot of different forking ideas to follow through, and I can do some numeric analysis, bring in and do data. But I'm going to stop the demo here. But you see, this is a very different and novel way to do fundamental analysis, right? So I got numeric data, unstructured data, web search, hypotheses, all in one place. I can just basically follow these things and just come up with ideas, back them up, iterate, go into a new direction, put things together in one dashboard. So this is where we see that the future of fundamental investing is going to be like for instance, I can go to the next step, ask the Copilot to help me come up with a valuation model, right? What are some of the metrics I should capture? What is the data source for that? Maybe I go search for that data sources and start patching things together. So it really gives you one platform to be able to navigate all the complexities and moving parts of a fundamental investor process. And that's what we're excited about. And we think this is going to be a very important distinction how we do fundamental investing in this century.
So this was very helpful, Ihsan. Especially I enjoyed the parts where you were talking about the hypothesis creation. I think that was great. So I was curious in your interactions with the clients and what you've seen in the market. You found some use cases being more popular than others, or some use cases that the clients have found more impactful?
Yeah, so there is, I think the biggest interest right now, and this is early days. You, I think, described it as like embryonic days at some point in the conversation, if I remember right. So right now, it's actually a little bit more appealing for discretionary kind of investors, right? Because their process, apologies, their process is the demo that we just went through, right? That you're dealing with a lot of disparate data sources. A good chunk of them are qualitative. So trying to make everything quantitative is a little difficult. And that's where we're seeing that these co-pilots and whatnot are actually quite attractive to people. It's not limited to equity. Like that's, I should definitely stress. So there is a big appeal for this for macro investors, because remember, when you're, let's say, trading treasuries and things of that nature, you're still dealing with very qualitative insights, such as what did the Fed say? How hawkish is this? What is their reasoning? So there's other examples of this in the world of macro investing, where it's like Fed speeches, central bank speeches, and things of that nature. Again, it's a little too discretionary, right? So it's right now, it's a little less relevant, I would say, or maybe relevant is the wrong word. It's not ready, I believe, for a truly quant scale. Because imagine that if you're a quant client looking at the similar type of issues, they tend to just essentially ignore the qualitative aspects right off the bat, because you just didn't have the right tools to be able to handle these type of things. But now the tool is there. It just needs to scale to be relevant for the quant type of use cases, right? So we're seeing some emerging signs that people are interested in this. So I think it will happen in the near future. So let me just give you an idea. So we did this analysis for one stock for one quarter. So what if we built the technology so that you can ask these questions to say, at the end of the earnings season, look back and tell me, how does the S&P 500 firms talked about the rate and inflation environment, right? It's such a loaded question that would require dealing with hundreds of documents. So can we do this today? We probably can, but it's not as a smooth experience as the demo that we just went through, right? Like, dealing with one document is one thing. Dealing with 500 documents on the fly is a whole different ballgame. So, but we will get there. Like, the technology is keeping up. It's pacing up really well. New tools are coming to the market all the time. So I think we're going to get to that kind of scale. I think we're going to see a lot more applications in other asset classes. Like I mentioned, treasuries. The moment that you talk about central banks and whatnot, it becomes relevant for foreign exchange. So because now you need to keep track of what Central Bank of India has said to be able to have a position about the rupee. So what if we actually connect those speeches in real time to the co-pilot, so it can basically say, this is the decision that the Central Bank of India has done, and now you can relate it to your real-time trading of the rupee against USD, right? So those things, I think, will come. It will open up a lot more interesting ideas around different asset classes, move out of discretionary. I think everyone is going to get a little bit more quant over time with these type of tools, because now that we have the tool to be able to turn qualitative things to quantitative insights very quickly, maybe that's not at the right scale just yet, but now we have the tool, right? So it could be the case that discretionary investors become a lot more quantitative. It would be the case that quant clients start looking at these things much more often and systematically. Maybe they meet somewhere at the middle. I don't know. These are things to watch out for in the industry.
Right. A detailed question. In terms of uploading the document to OpenBB, can we upload multiple documents and
Yeah.
ask Copilot to go through those at the same time?
Yes, you can upload multiple things, multiple PDFs, multiple spreadsheets, and so on. But this is very emerging technology. So right now, we are actually working on making sure that the Copilot does a really good job managing the context if there are multiple things that are being uploaded at the same time, and understands that these are different things. Like the main use case for what you just said, for instance, and we get this question asked all the time, is let's say I have access to 3 broker reports about the same stock, and I upload them all at once. I want the Copilot to do a competitive summary of who is the most bullish on this stock, who is the most bearish, and why. So that kind of comparative analysis is right now is not very easy to do. So we're building the functionalities around those things because yes, you can upload multiple files at the same time. The problem is that how are you going to make sure that the Copilot does the comparative analysis correctly? Understand that, look, this is a different broker talking about the same stock. This is another broker talking about the same stock. Summarize these 2 things by thinking about the other broker's points in mind also. So there's sort of like cross control of the context, that these are things that we're still working on. So yes, in principle, yeah, you can upload multiple things, but then the Copilot can get confused about them. So that's, I think, it's a main use case that we are trying to build, and these are things that the industry is really excited about.
Right. Let's switch gears a little bit. There is a huge privacy concern about some of these among potential users of Gen AI platforms, including fundamental investors. Do you think these concerns or issues are valid? How should we think about them?
Yeah, I think they are more than valid. They're almost like table stakes. If you get the poker reference, I mean, they're going to be fundamental issues for the industry to adopt generative AI solutions at scale, we believe. I mean, that's our hypothesis, essentially. And the reason for that is the following. So, I mean, people right now are, very early days, everyone is just so excited about like the things that we can do with this and with these tools and all of that. But you need to keep in mind several things. The moment that you are a fund and you're talking about 5 people, 10 people, analysts, portfolio management teams, potentially uploading, I was using publicly available documents, like the transcript is in a public domain, the filings are in public domain, news, you get it from a provider. But when you're inside the fund, I can start uploading things that are proprietary. I might have access to a data set, and this is a very common case. I'm purchasing data sets from about a very particular type of signal from a commercial vendor. This is not in the public domain. So I'm asking questions to this very private data. And in the background, I'm using a public cloud. When I say public, I mean it as, there's an API behind this large language model. It's transmitting your context, your prompt to another commercial firm, OpenAI, and it's on my platform. So I get to see the traffic. So I get to see what is your context, what is your question, and these are potentially very sensitive documents that we're talking about. Or they don't necessarily need to be very sensitive, like HR documents, compliance documents, internal policy documents. You probably don't want to risk someone knowing all of a sudden that some kind of information leakage, that they know your risk limits inside your firm, and things of that nature, right? So that's the issue with the public cloud and the public APIs. When you're dealing with sensitive, confidential, even data that contains personal identifiers and things of that nature. So there's a concerns about leakage, privacy, and worst case scenario, security. Like we have seen some examples of this in the public news, that these things could be open for cybersecurity risks, where some very clever systematic prompting, I can figure out what are the other users are asking about, what kind of things that they put into context and things of that nature. So we need to be very mindful of these things. So when you're an institutional investor, all of these three things that I said could be deal breaker to be able to get an enterprise level adoption. So we see that there's a certain trend that people increasingly would like to move to either on-prem slash some more private to hybrid cloud, where they have legal and IT infrastructure agreements available. They know what gets logged. They have control over these things, who sees what, and to what purpose it could be used for. So this trend with things moving to private cloud is going to be pretty interesting to watch. So the way that we address this at OpenBB is that the demo that I showed, it was on a public browser. So I was using everything public cloud. But you can take OpenBB to your private cloud. So in that way, you sort of adopt a clone of OpenBB, and OpenBB doesn't get to see anything you're doing. It's all the data and everything essentially lives within the four walls of your security parameters. You can safely use these things without concerns about your IP be getting leaked outside your organization. So we believe that that kind of infrastructure is going to be table stakes if you expect institutional level adoption. If we have time, I can briefly also elaborate on another potentially interesting trend that we might observe. So right now,
Sure.
there's open source LLMs also available, right? There's a lot of chatter about them, excitement about them, but the kind of things that I showed on the screen earlier today, in our experience, we find it really difficult in a very demanding industry like fundamental investing and whatnot. The public open source models don't do as good of a job getting the same kind of accuracy, right? Like, this is a very demanding industry. Like I said, you're not going to get away with, I'm asking guidance about a particular type of metric, and you completely miss it, or you misinterpret the text and you don't compute things right, and all of my analysis is messed up on a very important metric. Like, if you're an analyst, if you have doubts, you can't present that to your portfolio manager, right? Like, the expectations are pretty high. So we don't yet see that open source models live up to those kind of expectations.
Right. I personally enjoying this conversation. I think we can go on for hours, given the breadth of the things that we can talk about. But why don't we conclude our conversation with one last question? Let's say I'm a fund manager. I have a small fund. We're 5 people, and we want to sort of utilize this in our investment process. How do you think we should get started, Ihsan? What have you seen in the market?
Yeah. So the beauty of OpenBB, I think, and this is something that really differentiates us from a lot of the vendors, the entry fee for generative AI platforms is actually very high. We, on the other hand, actually open sourced OpenBB. Actually, from the very start, like, it's not that we open source, it started as open source, and we decided to keep it that way. So my suggestion to someone like that, and we actually see, this is not a hypothetical. I talk to new fund launches fairly often. People basically complain about being required to buy. I don't want to name competitor names. I don't want to badmouth anybody, but if you think about these big vendors, there's starter fees to get their solutions is like $20,000, $30,000 just for one license, right? And then no one has a complete solution for anything. Like, some of them are good at one asset class, some of them have good Gen AI features, but it only works in their little walled garden. If you go outside, then you're just left on your own. And if you're a small fund, look, just buying a couple of these licenses, you're in the six figures already, and you haven't done anything yet. So that's where people find OpenBB very interesting. You can use this free. So you can just basically start it free. You can start just basically buying whatever data licenses that you would like to pursue. Generally, buying an API key from the vendor is cheaper than buying an entire web solution, Excel, and this and that. So you can just basically get those things, do a little bit of dev work, which is not very expensive in today's world. Like, a lot of people are, have the basic skills. The students, they all come with Python skills nowadays. It doesn't take a lot of work to connect them to OpenBB. You got the dashboard tool for free once you connect these data sets. And then for Copilot, use an open source one. If you really want to have a cheap version of this to get started, start with an open source one. If you find that, look, I need much accurate solutions and things like that, and then you can just basically upgrade to pro version of this, that we're going to give you access to a best in class type of solution at a fairly reasonable price.
It makes sense. Well, this was tremendously helpful, Ihsan. OpenBB is definitely one of those companies to keep an eye on. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you and the team in the near future on your next milestones.
Yeah, looking forward to catching up again. You'll be hearing a lot from us in 2025. We're at a very early stage firm, but things are looking very interesting. And looking forward to maybe have another version of this interview a year or so down the line. Hopefully, we're going to have a lot more to share by then.